It is 5:10 in the morning. I'm Erin.
I'm Mike.
I'm Kyle.
And tonight on the Sleepy Nerds podcast, we interpret Mike's dreams about dying in the Hindenburg disaster. To our New Year episode, slightly late in January for 2018.
Yay. I'm fine with it because I've had like a lot of crazy old people customers when I worked at my video store, and up until like April, they'd still tell me Happy New Year. So like we're on track. By crazy person standard, we're on track.
By crazy person standard, we're also ahead of schedule apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're way ahead.
Yeah.
I think up until like the week after Chinese New Year, it's still acceptable to say Happy New Year, no matter when that falls.
I don't know when Chinese New Year is, so okay.
It's another...
Okay, cool.
Up until the Jewish New Year, which I believe is in September, it's fine to say Happy New Year. So... on the sort of kind of New Year's topic that we are sort of kind of fitting to with our schedule, sort of kind of, we are going to be talking about origin stories tonight.
Woo!
The best, the worst, nothing in between.
Like what makes a good origin story, what doesn't make a good origin story. Kind of investigate those.
Yes.
So.
We're trying out a shorter format, so... we'll see. You'll see by the timestamp whether or not we keep that promise.
Yeah, we picked number of words out of a hat. Mm-hmm. Mike, you have 5 words. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Is that like overall, or is it like that Who's Line game where you can only speak in sentences that are 5 words long?
Just 5 words.
Just 5 words total. Okay.
How many do I?
I could do that.
We're already over.
No, 5 for my argument.
Oh, okay.
Are we arguing?
You only need 1 to say Batman.
Why do you just immediately assume we're going to argue about the origins?
Because that's what we do.
I mean, yeah. So would we like to start with our best origin stories or our worst?
Worst.
Worst?
We're going to talk about, like, first off, we decided to, like, leave out the most popular origins just because everyone knows them.
Oh, yes, you're correct. So, like, yeah, it's hard to judge, like, Spider-Man or Batman, though I'm sure Mike is going to talk about Batman anyway.
Superman.
Or Superman's origin, because...
I wrote in my notes, Batman... because Batman.
Yes, you only need 3 of your 5 words.
That wasn't a serious one. I just wrote it down.
I feel like what makes all those characters, like, that makes their origins so great. And I mean, we're not going to talk about them, like, we're not going to pick them, but they're so great because you could tell all their origins in, like, 4 panels of a comic book. Like, a very simple origin. I feel most people, if you ask them, just even if they weren't comic book fans or, like, really into pop culture, they could tell you what their origins were.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, Batman's parents were killed, Superman was sent in a rocket, Spider-Man was bitten by a spider, etc.
Yeah. Basically. Mm-hmm. So, like, we did preclude those from our best or worst lists just because they're such like cultural touchstones, really. It's like hard to...
There's nothing more to say.
Yeah, and it's hard to be like, okay, well, like, other than that, which is what we're doing.
So...
Shia LaBeouf arrest alert?
James Franco arrest alert.
Oh, shit.
Did he make it off? What was he on?
Seth Meyers.
Yeah. Did he make it off there okay? Probably.
He's
No.
accosted in the green room.
He's just arrested as soon as he stepped off stage.
Yeah. By Dave Franco. It was real weird.
He was undercover the whole time.
Or they arrested him for beating up Dave Franco after the appearance on Colbert. Cut all this out. Anyway.
It's all very topical.
That, like, no one else will understand.
I feel like, on topic, James Franco's a piece of shit. Mm-hmm. I feel like I could record that any time of the year.
That's,
and
yeah.
we're fine.
I don't know if that's topical, but that's definitely...
a fact.
Like, yeah, and appropriate for any time of the year.
All right, let's bring it back.
So, Erin, like, who do you pick first?
Wait, are we doing best or worst first?
We'll do, like, our favorite first. And we'll just kind of, like...
We are?
Yeah.
The opposite of what we said a minute ago?
I wasn't listening. I was really wrapped up in James Franco being a
in
piece
your
of shit.
defense, it was something Mike said, so...
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about best first?
Whatever.
Oh my god. Okay, we're gonna start out with best ones. This is like a sort of even a broader, even broader than what we were trying to do, which is just one. But I think the Watchmen, which is sort of like most of the comic, their origin, their sort of setup to how they got to the like current time of the investigation is really well done. And it's like a multiple thing, but I don't feel like there's any of them that I'm like, yeah, that was dumb. Like the entire sort of becoming vigilantes and forming a vigilante crew, and then Dr. Manhattan, who's really the only one with like, he's the only one with powers, so the only one with like a sort of crazy origin story of
I think Silk Spectre 2 is probably the worst one out of the group. Just because like...
in general or her origin story?
Well, yeah. But, like, I'm a superhero because my mom was a superhero, and she wanted me to be the same superhero, so I'm a superhero. It's like, cool.
I mean, it is like... it's dumb, but it also fits the character because she's also dumb. But I mean, in terms of like, yeah, if your mom's like a famous superhero.
Yeah, but the original Silk Spectre was a hero, goddammit.
Yeah.
It's a line from the movie.
I got you.
I know, like, I think it just can like add to the tragedy of her story. I think she's one of the more tragic characters.
Right.
Like, having no say in her legacy.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that it's not a tragic story. I'm just saying like that the origin is kind of like, meh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like mind-blowing, like, oh man, she took over from her mom, but it strikes me as like very like genuine and like a well thought out world that both like her and Night Owl too are like second ones, where it is like, oh well, they were big in the 40s, 50s, and like, oh, and then like there was someone to pass on the mantle, which is something that happens in comics, so it was like interesting they addressed that. It wasn't just like, oh, here's a superhero team and they're all originals and like there was nothing in the world before them.
Ozymandias had powers as well, right? He was just really smart.
He was just really smart. Yeah,
didn't he have super
like
strength too.
Well, no, they sort of talk about like his advanced like
He's
reflexes.
He's like the perfect like human specimen.
Yeah, he was just really strong and really smart and really fast. So I don't know. I guess I would classify those as powers. I did air quotes for those that can't see.
They don't touch on him a lot other than like being really smart and his sort of like his perspective on that, but they don't really address anything other than like he has good reflex time and like he's buff, but I always assume that he like worked out and trained.
Can I point out like how generous we're being with our adjectives for Ozymandias? It's like buff and strong. Like he's just like super buff and strong, and he's just like really dreamy, and his hair is so goddamn wavy.
He wore a skirt.
Yeah.
In the comics, anyway.
Is that something you say about? Well, I guess that is something you say about people you're really into. Wear that. He wore that skirt.
Yeah. More of a skirt wearing him type deal, but
so steering away from that's mine. That's my best origin story, or a really good origin story that I enjoy at least. Okay. I know it's an entire series, but who would like to go next?
I can go. My favorite origin story, Hellboy. All right, Mike.
All right, Mike.
No. No.
What is it about the Hellboy origin?
I really like paranormal stuff.
Sure.
Especially like witchcraft, like Satan-y stuff.
Okay.
It's kind of my wheelhouse. I enjoy World War II stories. Actually, all the origins I was like looking at that I really enjoyed. It was like Hellboy, Rocketeer, Captain America.
There's just something about like Nazis that really appeals to me.
It really resonates.
Says Kyle, 2018.
Yeah, that'll be the pull quote for the season 2.
Yeah.
No, I kind of like the idea of like I felt especially like World War II era characters, like it's heroes that want to be heroes, like minus cynicism.
Sure.
So it's just like heroes, like I don't know, I feel like telling stories in that time period. There's a very clear like black and white, good, bad, and I like Hellboy. I mean, on the surface level, he subverts the idea of like he's literally a demon from hell, like born of a witch and a demon, summoned by Nazis, and he's the good guy.
Right. It's a very nurture over nature kind of story.
Yeah, and I like the character's attitude. I like all the comics have been told kind of like out of chronological order. So you get stuff from like the 50s, and then it'll get all the way to like the 90s, and it'll cut back to like his first stories. And I like that it's a really clever way to kind of like keep going back and not retconning Hellboy's origins, but you just keep finding out more and more and more about like why he is the way he is. Like his upbringing, how he meets BPRD agents, his love of pancakes, if you will. Really enjoy that. Yes?
Go on.
No, what?
I was going to say something and then you made that pancake pun, so never mind.
What were you going to say?
No, continue with you. I'll come back to it. I'll bring it up.
I will derail this podcast right now.
I think that's already derailed.
Yeah.
And the best thing that can be said about Hellboy being created as a character, it led to Abe Sapien being created as a character.
Oh, is that fish duty like you? Yeah. Okay.
He's not the fish dude that I like, but he is a
I'm
fish
sorry.
dude that I like.
He's a fish guy that Erin has sexual fantasies about.
One of
Yeah.
the multiple, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the.
I'm
Erin,
sorry, is this the kink shame podcast?
My least favorite origin is the origins of Erin being attracted to fishmen.
I only said, oh yeah, that The Shape of Water looks really good, like 4 months in advance, which you sent me the trailer to, Kyle, in the first place, and then it was just like 4 months of jokes about like, we get it, you want to fuck a fish dude. And then I saw it and it was a great movie.
And you do.
That's not the point though.
That's besides the point,
Anyway,
Kyle.
no, but I like Hellboy.
I also read Abe Sapien comics long before that.
I like his entire universe. I like, and okay, like, so all the characters. I like Abe Sapien. I like Liz. I like Roger. I like that idea of like, you know, a family of misfits, like a family of orphans almost. I really enjoy
Like-
origins like
Umbrella
that.
That
Academy.
family. Oh.
Well, or that.
It's the Umbrella
would you-
Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, aren't they all literally a family though? Most of them.
I don't know. No, none of
sure?
them. None of them are technically blood related. They're all born at the exact same moment in time.
That's right,
But for
yeah.
like from different women who had no idea that they were pregnant
That's
all
right.
over the world. Can't
So-
wait for that show. It's gonna
Yeah.
be great.
It is gonna be really good.
I'm still
I should have
in
picked that
shock
for my
that-
origin. I like that.
I brought up Batman, Mike didn't.
Well, we
Well,
agreed at the
yeah.
beginning of the podcast to kind of.
Well, Batman's the answer to everything, so it doesn't need to be brought
He's
up
the new
again and
42.
again and again.
Yeah. But no, I really like his origin. I feel like I haven't read a lot of it in a long time. I feel like Hellboy comes out so infrequently. And like since like
Well, Mike Mignola's not doing it anymore.
he's like they just did the Hellboy in Mexico.
I think that was his
and
last one.
That was the
right?
last one I think, and I think they're doing another one.
I don't know. It's too confusing.
But it again like it now well they have omnibus editions coming out now that it's going to publish all of Hellboy chronologically. Which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to read that because I'm sure I've missed like so much of
It's a lot of stuff.
going back and I know it's just one of those interesting things. Like they go back and like explain like where he got his trench coat, like where he got this, and like he has all these like little knickknacks he carries around.
I hope one of those is just like a super like where he got his trench coat. Oh, there was a store and they were having sales on trench
Yeah.
coats. So.
But I mean,
where he got his shoes. Like,
I
hey
wouldn't be
man, you want these shoes?
I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised. Like Hellboy has a lot of like, it's kind of the thing of like conflating like very high like energy supernatural like weird shit with like very mundane. I mean, it's just like Hellboy's character, like how he reacts to stuff is like, ah, crap. Like,
Which you would if you'd been doing it that long, which is always nice.
yeah. I kind of hope, you know, they have the new movie coming out next year, I think.
Do they have a release date?
The David Harbour one. I kind of hope they don't retell his origin. Like, yeah, I like good origin stories, but I'm over seeing like a lot of superhero origin stuff, especially Hellboy's already had 2 movies.
Yeah, but
Well, I was
if they're planning a franchise, they probably will.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that like a lot of origin stories are like Spider-Man, Superman. Like we've seen them enough. We get them culturally. We know them. But like I feel like Hellboy is not so much in the social awareness right now, and it's been so long since he's had a
Yeah.
movie.
He's not, and I agree. It's just like I don't.
They could
I
also
guess like
probably
personally,
go.
is, I know like you know comic book movies aren't made for comic book fans. They're
No.
made for like a wide
Yeah.
audience of like never seen these movies before. I don't want to get another Hellboy movie and get another like 40 minutes of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be told without being like 40 minutes of the movie, or it can be like, I don't think like a Spider-Man Homecoming style, just ignoring it completely really would work for Hellboy. But I feel like you the average moviegoer would. I'm saying I feel like again. Damn it, sorry Vanessa.
I feel like she'll be okay with that.
Moviegoers, the average moviegoer is going to go into that and just be like, there's just a demon guy. Where did he come from? Who is this?
Yeah.
I need some kind of setup. You can't just be like, hey, let's start in media res and not explain anything. People are going to be like, what the fuck is going on?
But
So you need some amount.
Because how old's the first Hellboy movie at this point?
13 years?
13
14 years?
Yeah. So
14 now?
they're
2004?
going to be teenagers and young adults seeing this movie that have potentially never seen the original.
Fuck 'em.
I thought for a second you said they're going to be teenagers, like the cast, and I was
No,
like,
yeah.
teenage Hellboy, like a
Hell teenager.
high school AU of Hellboy and Abe Sapien and the whole
Hell,
crew. Like,
actual boy.
yeah. You happy with that one, Kyle?
I am. I just enjoy origin stories where Nazis get punched in the face. I mean, honestly, I
Where
could have
is
filled in
that?
their character. Mike, who's your favorite?
So for mine, I actually went with a villain.
Okay, cool.
A Nazi.
Yes, Adolf Hitler.
Go on.
The next 18 hours are Mike's
not cut that.
incredibly detailed, incredibly.
I was wondering why you brought that manifesto in, like, when the rest of us just have a page of notes.
No, I went with Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze is one of my favorite Batman villains, but like mostly because of the fact that he's just not a villain for villain's sake. But
a la animated series origin story, I'm assuming.
Well, that's just his origin story.
Here's a fucking origin story.
Anyway.
The Heart of Ice?
Yeah.
That's a great episode.
Yeah. It's the
Emmy-nominated episode, right?
Emmy-winning episode.
Winning, yeah.
Anyway.
How dare
But yeah,
you.
Mr. Freeze gets his abilities because he's trying to find a cure for his wife's disease. And then even after he gets these awesome powers and becomes a criminal, the whole
There were air quotes there for those listening.
The whole point of him being a criminal is to like do things to work on the cure for his wife. Like he's robbing banks to get money to fund his research. He's like stealing, equipment for his research to help his wife. So like it's not like evil for evil's sake. It's evil for a purpose.
Yeah.
I enjoy villains like that as well. Like villains that don't think they're villains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all good villains don't think they're villains unless they're just crazy.
Those are shitty villains where it's like, I'm going to blow up the universe.
Right, exactly. And I mean, there's some amount of like, okay, why is this guy robbing a bank? Like, because he's greedy. Because he just like wants the money or needs the money to survive or whatever. And that's like, okay, but with a recurring villain, you sort of need to get something deeper than that.
Yeah.
Rather than like, why does Penguin do stuff?
I would even say Mr. Freeze.
He's just
money. He's just a mobster.
Yeah.
But I would even say
Oh, I get it now.
I would even say Mr. Freeze is in like a gray area because there's been times where he's worked with Batman and helped Batman like for a purpose.
Sure. A lot of Batman villains have sort of gone that way, especially in more recent years that are just like, oh, they're going to help him out this one time, or oh, they have, like mixed
I think that
motives.
makes, especially like Batman's villains. I really think you could have picked like any Batman villain.
Yeah.
Like
other than Penguin.
Or
Joker. I mean, Joker's
Kite Man.
Kite Man. Listen,
Although Kite Man, like recently got like really
recently.
sympathetic.
Yeah.
Like,
but like,
were his parents killed by kites?
Benjamin Franklin.
What?
You look at that. Yeah.
You were like
that
on
one was a thinker.
point with that one.
But like, I've been saving that joke for the 6 months that we've been talking about Kite Man.
The only reason
Did you like plant that idea, like that episode of How I Met Your Mother, where he's
accepted it,
pretending not to work, like be able to use chopsticks? You've been like talking about Kite Man casually for like the entire course of our
Side
friendship.
note, Dr. Freeze, because his last name is spelled Fries, right?
He's German.
Okay,
German?
great. Who cares?
European.
I think
Austrian.
the movie was Austrian. But wouldn't it be cool if he had an alternate origin where he was like trying to save his wife, but then he stopped to get like food on the way, and then
Frozen burrito.
And then Batman like stopped him and like pushed him to a fry later, and he became Mr. Fries. And he was all like fry-based, fast food-based
crimes.
Yeah.
It's like the Condiment King, except
Yeah.
like with you got fried.
It's like it smells like goddamn hamburgers in here. This is the tastiest part of Arkham.
Yeah. But the only
it's the worst part about bringing Mr. Fries to Arkham. I always get hungry right after.
gotta take the Batmobile through the drive-thru. It doesn't fit.
It's like Mr. Freeze got the Batmobile all goddamn salty again.
Anyway,
Kyle, as on point as you are with like coming in with jokes really fast tonight, an equal amount, I am just super done with you tonight.
anyway, no, the only reason I didn't pick the Joker is because he doesn't really have an origin story.
Yeah.
Like he has several, but nothing that's like concrete.
Yeah.
And he's also batshit crazy.
Yeah. Right.
I like that aspect of Joker.
I would say he is a good example of a good villain, but not necessarily a good origin story.
Yeah.
Which is part of his character is like he doesn't really have an origin story. But
Yeah.
Like his whole deal of like, if he's gonna have an origin, he'd like to be multiple choice.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. I don't like that recently. No, there's like 3 Jokers now.
They still haven't figured out what the fuck they're doing
who
with
gives a
that.
shit
So
about
we'll
that?
see.
Yeah, that's a bad editorial choice. That's bad storytelling.
I'm just curious to see. I mean, if they do the multiple Earth things, it makes sense. But like, they teased it like 2 years ago and haven't said anything about it. It's like, cool. Give me some answers, please.
And I like. I guess I just like sad, tragic origin story, especially for like bad guys. I mean, think about that. And yeah, Mr. Freeze is definitely,
Yeah.
I think, one of the saddest, one of the best ones.
Yeah. My other one, Clayface. Because
his origin?
he was an actor, and there's like slight variations to it. It also depends on which Clayface you're talking about, but the original Clayface was an actor, and I think he went to like an audition or something, or like he got caught up in something and got doused in chemicals, like some chemical product, and like it altered his.
All I
physical
remembered was like
conversation.
chemical accident.
Yeah, pretty much. But like, he was just an innocent guy and got caught up in this stuff, and his whole thing is just trying to find a cure for himself.
Is there any Batman villain, with the exception of Joker, who doesn't really have an origin story, whose origin story isn't like really on the nose ironic? Like, he was an actor and now he's Clayface, or like, oh, he was studying like cryogenics and now he's Mr. Freeze.
Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah. Because he doesn't really have any like ironic like.
He's a megalomaniac, and
nicknames.
now he's a megalomaniac.
He's another one who doesn't really have like a definitive origin story. Like, they never really say when for certain he was born, or like when he like what he did. Like, because all they say is like, he's old and he's died many times, but he keeps coming back.
So the answer is only when they haven't clearly stated an origin,
Yeah.
basically.
So it's just like, he's another one
What's,
that's all over the place.
Black Mask, is that his name?
Yeah. Roman
Isn't his father's coffin? Is Black Mask is how his.
Did they superheat his coffin and then he just like face slammed into it and it melted?
I think
over
Black
his
Mask.
remember.
I think his mask is made of his like father's coffin or his mom's coffin or something like that.
That's another one that there's different variations on. Like, some say that, I don't know. It's just
Do you remember when he
complicated.
was it Catwoman's sister eat her husband's eyes?
What the fuck?
That
No,
was
I don't remember that.
I'm writing a whole thing about how comics got like super edgy and grimdark for no reason between like 2004 and 2010, and I think that
I know
falls
why.
in there. Oh no,
You think?
Christopher Nolan Batman movies.
Yeah. Identity Crisis.
Yeah, I have a lot too. Riddler's another origin that is never.
You
like-
only get one,
I know.
Mike.
No, I'm just saying.
I pick all the Batman villains.
Mr. Freeze is definitely my favorite. I'm just saying that there's just so many different like Batman villains that have like no definitive origin. They're just like always all over the place. So
All right. So like,
we'll move on.
On the flip side, like what origins do we hate? Like,
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, do you want to move into worse ones? So, in thinking about this, I was realizing a lot of bad origins for me are just either boring or really played out tropes. And I think we've talked about this topic before, where it's hard to look back at some things when an origin was written in, you say, the 60s or the 50s, and being like, oh, well, that's like such a cliche. Like, well, maybe it wasn't then. It's kind of hard to say. And like talking about, I was talking about like Hulk and Fantastic Four and all these superheroes and Spider-Man who were like had radiation origin stories, and that was very much like what was hot and like was very like finger on the pulse of the nation at the time. Now it's like, oh, that's dumb and that's like bad science, but it probably was at the time. Like, oh my gosh, they were sufferers from radiation and that could happen to anyone. And, so.
it was very like of the time, like no one knew what was going on. So it's comic writers are like, I don't know, how'd that happen? Isotopes.
Yeah, pretty much. And we were talking about that because I liked the rewrite of Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man.
The genetically engineered
spider.
spider.
It's genetically engineered spider, not a radioactive spider. Because that's, in 2000, 2001, that's like, oh, like genetically modified. That's the next wave of science.
Do you think that the three of us have as much like of an idea about how genetic engineering works as someone in the 1960s, like reading the comic book, had an idea of like how like anything like with like radiation or nuclear physics works?
Probably. I'd say, well, I would think possibly
It's like 40 years from now, people are gonna like making a podcast like, I know it's like the worst origin, like genetically modified
Well,
stuff.
I was gonna
You know
say
what,
even that now is a little outdated, where it's like, okay, genetically modified, that wouldn't have.
If that's
any...
how, or like every time I eat an apple, I should like grow an extra arm.
Exactly.
No, I feel like maybe back then they
Apple
had
Man.
more knowledge of radiation just because they saw so many of those goddamn nuclear like warning videos. You're like,
mean,
if
maybe,
a
but-
missile's coming,
All I
duck
know
in,
is I gotta go under her desk, man.
Yeah. Well, I would say.
or
I
else
mean,
you'll grow a third leg.
information was much more like under lock and key and difficult to access then, though. So I would still say, like, even though they're like, I know radiation and nuclear bombs are going to kill us and I have to duck under a desk, they still wouldn't be able to say, like, how it works.
Yeah.
Where I have, like, a high school understanding of genes and gene
Did
editing.
either of you ever read Ruins?
No.
It was like a 2-issue Marvel thing, and you read Marvels, right? The Alex Ross. I think we talked about it.
I own it, and I've read part of it.
I think
I
know Mark Waid owns it. Probably, I don't know. But it's all from the point of view of a photographer for like the Daily Bugle, I think, or reporter for the Daily Bugle, like in the 60s, kind of like dealing with like all these heroes popping up. Ruins is like the alternate dark take on that, where it's like, oh yeah, there was like mutants are caused by like all this like radiation. But, like Wolverine is just this guy that's like his bones wouldn't stop growing, so it's just some crippled guy that has like bones like jutting out of his hands, and the Hulk is some like this gigantic, he's like just a gigantic like tumor person, like much more realistic take on the material.
Sure. So those are just a sort of overarching idea of what I think makes a bad origin story in general. Another thing is what I chose as my worst, which is Green Arrow as told by the TV show Arrow.
Batman, yeah.
Batman is the answer.
God damn it. I find Green Arrow's origin story is actually an okay one. I don't mind it. I think it is like not completely unique, but it has some interesting unique elements of like, oh, there's a plane crash and I was trapped on this island and I got trained. Arrow went through the problem that I think a lot of long-running heroes or just properties in general go through, where they're like, they do that thing where they try and insert more into the backstory, where it's like, in season 1, he's like, I've been on this island for 5 years? Yep. 5 years. And, I was trained, now I'm like a wild man. And then they're like, oh, but actually, like, Waller found him, and he was in China, and he's been doing all this other
shit.
shit.
In Russia.
And you're like, really, going into season 1, he'd been, like, all over Asia, and had been back sort of in society, though not, completely, he wasn't just, like, living normally.
He was like a hitman, essentially,
Yeah, and then he, like, watching that and then going back to episode 1 and being like, so why is he a fucking wild man and no one saw him?
Mike and I might make the same point. I'll let him go first.
I was okay with the Russia stuff. The Waller stuff is what I was not okay with.
The Waller stuff was trash, and I think that was, like, very indicative of, like, those seasons of Arrow. Yeah. The past seasons, like, all the Russia stuff, like, Dolph Lundgren was the bad guy. Yeah. It's, like, really fucking good. Well, and not just because I love Dolph Lundgren.
That part was cool because they even touched on that, like, in the very... Was it first episode or second episode where he goes to like that garage and he meets with the Russian guys and he shows them his tattoo, like, and then when they showed that, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but the China stuff and the Waller, they just kind of threw that
and
in
the magic stuff. Remember the magic stuff with Constantine?
What, like 1 or 2 episodes? It was one episode.
No, it was like that whole backstory season.
Oh yeah, that's right, with that weird jar thing on the that was weird.
I
was totally okay with the Constantine cameo though.
Yeah. It was one of those things where it's like that was just them trying to shoehorn the character in. Where he's like, wait a minute, I know a guy. It's like, cool, then wait, and you call him 3 seasons ago, and this exact same shit happened.
They were trying to save that show in any way they could.
Yeah, that's what really like just annoys me about those things is just like it makes no sense when you put it in like quote unquote backstory when it's really like flashback to be like, okay, well, all this story you've already told is now in universe sequentially after all that, so it doesn't make sense that it's never come up before. And I think it can be done well, but the Arrow is not a case of that.
The flashbacks in Arrow are done now, and I liked how they ended it because they showed in season 1, episode 1, he was on the island with like a full like wild man beard and hair. But like up to that point when he was in Russia, he didn't have any of that. And they showed that all that was like a shitty wig and a fake beard.
That's so fucking dumb.
It was so great.
It was not.
It was dumb. He was like running to get there. And he's
remember that.
Oh, he's like flattening his like shitty fake beard down. Like I love all of this.
And it was funny because in the very first episode, it looked
like a shitty fake beard.
No, in the very first episode of the show, it looked real.
Does it?
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all.
I was gonna say, I wish that they'd inserted in the first episode a scene where they were like, oh, like, do you want to shave? Like, hand him a razor, and he's like, no, don't touch it. Like, hold on,
I got this.
I'll go. And then he like goes into the bathroom for 2 seconds and comes back out completely clean shaven.
Got one of those crazy island pull off beards.
Yeah. or they were just like, oh, you look rough. You smell all right, though. You smell like you like hotel shampoo.
Lilac?
Yeah.
That's fucking Dapper Dan.
Little do you know that beard is actually peat moss. He just glued it to his face.
But
Kyle, your turn.
So I feel like there's again no specific person's origin, but just like a style of origin I hate. Cloned characters.
Ugh.
I really hate.
So like
Superboy.
Spider-Man in the 90s?
Yeah, Ben Reilly, Superboy. Do you remember the Joseph, the Magneto clone?
No.
No one does.
Good.
Do you know All right, so Wolverine, X-23 is a clone of him.
Correct.
But I like her. They've done interesting things. Do you know he has 9 other clones, and one of them is her sister, and her superhero name is Honey Badger?
Yeah.
Does she not give a fuck?
You need.
They're clones of X-23, not of Wolverine. But there's also
if you're
Dokken.
a clone of a clone, then you're also a clone of the original.
It's a very
No,
chicken
it's-
egg situation, except all the chickens are clones.
No, it's not. It's a very like if you like photocopy a piece of paper and then you take a copy of that photocopy, it is still a copy of the original.
But what if that?
Unless you
It's
like
very-
fucked with the
What if
contrast.
that copy has a vagina instead of a penis?
It's very, very...
That's a gray area.
It is incredibly confusing because... So the way... I read that story when they did it. So X-23 is the clone of Wolverine. And then there's like 9-ish clones of X-23. But they're kind of like the clones from Star Wars. They have accelerated growth.
I hate all of it.
And then... But there's the one youngest one who doesn't. Her name is Gabby.
Yeah.
Honey Badger. So she's got bone claws, but just one that comes out like in her middle finger, but she doesn't. They can't feel pain. It is just fucking
My
bizarre.
problem with clones.
And you say you like this, Kyle?
I like X-23,
Okay.
and I like Damien.
So
But
Damien's not really a clone though. Ish. He was conceived naturally.
he has clones.
There
and those
are
are dumb,
clone
yes.
of Damien. But
What's
Damien
its
is the
stupid
original.
name? The one that ended up killing him, the heretic.
Heretic.
That's
Yep.
stupid.
Okay, did they modify presumably X-23 like since she's a woman, she's not a direct clone, they did something to change that, or
They just changed her gender and her claws
or is Logan a trans male and
because there are
none
male,
of the clones went through the transition?
because there are male clones of Logan. They just
How
alter
many
the
fucking
genetics.
clones does he have?
At least 23.
Yeah.
All right,
it's probably
continue
more.
talking about
But
why clones are dumb, Kyle.
My problem with clones is as soon as I
just
feel
lazy.
as soon besides the fact that like as soon as I find out someone's a clone, all danger of anything that ever happened to that character is just off the table. It's like, oh, so like we could just make another one of you.
Yeah.
Like, all right.
It's very much like time travel in that regard, where you're like, oh, they died. Well, we know that they have the ability to go back in time and stop that, so who cares?
And I feel it's always the same story too with a clone. They find out they're a clone. It's kind of the same story when people find out they're like androids or robots and they didn't know about it.
like,
It's
oh,
like,
shit.
oh god, do I have a soul? Do I have humanity? It's like, I don't care. Like,
Also,
you've
like-
been doing all this stuff up until the point you found out, so clearly you do.
Here's a problem with the android one that it does not apply to the clone one. It's like, did you never notice that you took a shit in the 5 years you've been alive? Like,
Well, they had
or
the,
was that programmed
that's
in?
programmed in.
What scientist was like hunched over a computer?
That
like,
was an iOS
Honey, I can't come home.
that was an
I'm
iOS
working late."
update.
Yeah, I have to get this shit.
I mean,
code down.
all those iPhones shit themselves.
Do you
Hey,
do you think that that all worked perfectly then? They're like, man, I have like a really good digestive system, or was there a subroutine that made them like get constipated every now and then? I mean,
Clones are usually physically fit anyway, so maybe it was just regular.
I'm talking about androids, not
Whatever.
clones. Have you
Have you ever seen
if
an
it's
overweight android?
if it's a clone, you're sort of like putting something in the barrel and sending it off. Whatever happens as they grow is no longer like predestined. But if it's an android, what they're doing and how their body functions had to be thought out and like determined by a person or people.
I don't know. You're getting too deep with this.
I want to know who programs the android shits. Also a t-shirt.
That's
Anyway.
that's a unpublished Philip K. Dick book. Do androids dream electric sheep? The sequel was Who Programs the Android Shits?
I would watch
That was what the Blade Runner sequel was going to be. It was just Ryan Gosling on a toilet for 5.5 hours with just like super watery poops. That's why he's so angry. And then he'd find Harrison Ford and he'd be constipated. And he's like, duality of man.
Or they're like, is
God.
Harrison Ford a replicant? No, my shits are fine. They're like, oh, that's how you know.
Are you a replicant? Check the toilet.
I'm so glad
Do you remember
that.
Total Recall?
got
They
this
found out how people are the
conversation.
clones because they have like the dot. No, that's
So
the
fucking-
six man, 6 day?
No.
6 day, the Arnold Schwarzenegger clone movie. 6K
Sure.
is the one where they have like the dots
Yeah.
in their eyelid to find out. Do you think like if that was the case for the Blade Runner ones, they'd have like the dots in like their butthole? Like,
All right, let's move on.
okay.
Did you ever? Never
Mike,
mind.
we're
Remind me
talking
to tell you
about-
about a manga later.
Okay. Wait, what? Mike, let's get to yours.
Okay. So I mentioned this to Kyle and Erin last night. I found my worst origin story because I had read an article like a month before we picked this topic, and I'm like, this is perfect. The character's name is Codpiece.
Go on.
Good.
He is a Doom Patrol villain, and I have to just read the article because it's so fucking bizarre. It says, Codpiece began as an insecure high school student whom, when asking an attractive popular girl out on a date, was denied. Her reasoning was due to his height, claiming he wasn't big enough, but Codpiece believed this to be an insult to his genitals.
As one would.
This insecurity followed him throughout his adult life, resurfacing each and every time he was denied or declined by a girl in any sort of romantic sense. He attempted to find a doctor to do some surgery, but ran away from that after misinterpreting the doctor's concerns and advice as insults. Codpiece finally snapped when he hired a prostitute, and she suggested he wear something to pad the area up. The result was Codpiece creating a power suit and beginning a criminal spree under his new name, Codpiece.
First,
He has a cock rocket. There is a cannon.
I have an important question.
Mike, this is supposed to be worst.
This is horrible.
I have an important
What are you
question.
talking about?
Was this a Grant Morrison character?
No, this was like old Doom Patrol. Like I think before that.
Are you fucking serious? This isn't like 80s Grant Morrison Doom Patrol?
Hold on, let's see when he. Let me click.
Oh, I need to know when this happened.
This is. It looks old. Doom Patrol 70. First, Codpiece was created by Rachel Pollack. Or
Oh,
Raquel.
she was after.
Oh, she was after Grant
Yeah,
Morrison?
she was after Grant
Because
Morrison.
the art looks ancient.
I'm sure it's supposed to be that way. Yeah, I'm sure it's like supposed to look old time.
But like, he's got a cannon attached to his like jock strap.
I was gonna say like most of those like weirdo like Vertigo, like especially like Doom Patrol characters or like a Dial H for Hero, like the newer Dial H for Hero, like I think it's like the China Melville one. There's like a Open Any Window Man.
Aaron, this is Codpiece.
Can we
Look
can
at
we
it's
take
got
a
dr-
picture of the face that I'm making
Yeah.
and put it on social media?
I feel
it's
like
got a drill in
that's
it.
a pretty great like origin though. It's like, do you want to go on a date with me? You're not tall enough. So
It's because
Better-
of my dick, isn't it?
better build a dick cannon.
It's
So-
got a boxing glove in it.
First of all, I mean, not first of all, like seventh of all, but I'm gonna like skip past a bunch of things just because this caught my attention. No prostitute has ever said, "Oh, why don't you like put some padding down there?" That's not. What do you think a prostitute does? Like what and like related to that, what padding?
What if he doesn't know? And she's like trying to like unsub. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa! What are you doing? He's like, I'm a supervillain, not a whore.
Like what?
And also, I only carry quarters.
Like what does that even mean? Is she like what? I have so many questions.
know.
We aren't gonna get to the bottom of this.
There is no bottom to this. Okay, it's just like an never-ending black hole of dick cannon.
Yeah, I mean, do you?
Is that separate from like actual canon? Like, is that in the Star Wars, like the new Star Wars canon? Like, well, no, but it's in the Dick canon.
Well, there's the current canon and the
Philip K.
expanded
Dick
universe.
canon.
And
Yeah, the Philip K. Dick canon. That's the weapon I'm using. Whenever we get funds from this podcast, I'm building a Philip K. Dick cannon.
Does it just fire Harrison Ford at people?
no, android shits.
Android shit.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. And that's our show. Thanks for joining us for this semi-New Year's episode.
So excited for season 2, guys.
This has set the bar for our season 2 episodes. It is only going up from here.
This
Pun
episode
intended.
brought to you by Dick Cannons.
Yeah.
Dick cannon's coming to a store near you.
Man, if Dick Cannons could sponsor us, that would be great.
Well, we should probably make it first and then sponsor us.
No.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.
Steve Wozniak, get on it. Hey everybody, if you enjoy listening to the Sleepy Nerds podcast and want to hear more from us, you can follow us on Facebook at Sleepy Nerds Podcast, on Instagram and Twitter at Sleepy Nerds Pod, and can also subscribe to us on YouTube, Podbean, and iTunes.